Well, let's turn attention back to Niger Republic, which has been in the news in recent time. We know that the deposed president, Mohamed Bazoum, may have to face charges for high treason and for undermining national security. Well, that is if the pronouncement of the military junta is anything to go by. But this is coming just after reports the military junta is willing and ready for dialogue with ECOWAS. For more on the situation in Niger Republic, African Affairs analyst Lanre Siraj joins me now for in-depth analysis. Thank you for joining us on The World Now. Well, for about 3 weeks, the coup in Niger has been on. How did you receive the news that military junta is ready for dialogue?
I think this is actually a welcome development to a very reasonable extent, where you have both sides of the ECOWAS. I mean, maybe the protagonist and also the antagonist of the coup actually spitting fire before now, refusing to go peaceful reconciliation or resolution of the crisis. And this is actually really a very welcome development. That it is expected that both sides to ECOWAS position saying no option is off the table, even though peaceful reconciliation and dialogue would be pursued. But I think we want to see more, not on the side of just the coupists in Niger Republic, but also the same thing on the part of ECOWAS and other antagonists to the coup.
All right. On Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, this is.
Okay, Mr. Siraj.
Go ahead.
Okay. On Sunday, I spoke with a Nigerian retired ambassador, former ambassador to Libya, and he mentioned that if the military junta would want to prove that they're serious about readiness for dialogue, then first would be to release ousted President Mohamed Bazoum and his family. But now we're hearing other words from the junta that they would want to prosecute President Bazoum. How do you take that?
No, I think this is just that's going to be expecting too much. I think people should really get to understand what will be form and basis of negotiation. So the fact that the junta has expressed, his willingness to dialogue. Remember, I mean, the first visit by the delegation of the Nigerian government, led by the retired military head of state, Abubakar, was actually rebuffed without any concrete outcome or conversation with them. So that is where you have a stand. And now that you have the other groups that eventually went, you have the former Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, who was met by the head of the junta. You now have the ulama Muslim leaders who also went from Nigeria and were met also by the head of the military junta. These are signs that really needs to also give room. We will need to build on that without actually pushing too hard on what we expect. This is a sovereign nation, if you want to actually understand it better. This is also a situation where the populace in the country is almost divided along the line of support for the coup plotters and also some of the few. And if you want to look at it, the majority of the news that is coming out from Niger has not been anything as against the coup. More, or rather, what you have is almost like consistent jubilation and demonstration of support for the coupists. So where do you think they're getting the influence and support from? And there's been the support coming from Russia and a host of others, and including some of the other African countries, particularly even West African countries that have experienced similar, situation, and they're getting away with it. So thinking in a situation where we don't really have any casualties on the side of the coupists, I mean, saying that they should release Mohamed Bazoum as a sign of willingness for reconciliation, I think this is actually pushing too fast and too hard if we want the reconciliation. And people should be very careful so that we don't get to incite, some other conflict why we think that we're pushing for reconciliation. I think these are progressive steps that we've seen from ECOWAS and then also from the leaders in Niger. So it is now left for both sides to then come to how would the negotiation start. the whole restoration about democratic, governance and constitutionality in Niger Republic is not going to be a one-way thing. So there's not going to be a one stand that we want to say this is the only way to go. But the most important thing is the restoration of democratic governance and constitutionalism in Niger Republic.
Okay, Mr. Suraj. Yes, but then, there have been a lot of concerns about the conditions under which President Bazoum is being held. In that report we aired just before the interview, there were talks about his 20-year-old son, needing critical medical care, but he cannot access it because they are under what we'd call house arrest. So how would that be handled? Because aside the fact that the president will now deposed, but as a human, you have the right to life and the right to health care.
No, these are the clear things that we need to ask of. This is not under any law that you operate in a military junta. This is where we need to make the clear, straight demand for whatever it is that they have justification. And if you're not careful, I was hearing and reading some of the reports that the military junta is planning to actually also charge him for treason offenses. So we don't want to incite where they will have the use of existing law or even promulgate new law to justify the incarceration or the violation of the rights of those that are already under house arrest. So if they're still under house arrest, the clear demand that we should be making is their right to not only just life, to their well-being, to access to health, and also to meet with their family members. We don't want a situation where you want to push the junta to move them from house arrest to prisons, and also sometimes even the conviction that will come from courts. So the demand would be, if the junta is not bent on releasing them and waiting for negotiation, because we're just being factual, what you would expect is the junta would need to hold on to something for it to continue its hold on power. Releasing Bazoum is more or less like saying they have lost their basis without supporting the coup. But this is actually facing the reality, and it's important that we need to study from history when we're making some of these demands and also postulation, is that they deserve to actually have their rights to their medical health, the best of their well-being, and also necessary actions to be taken to ensure the expeditious release for them to enjoy their freedom, whatever form the government wants to take. But this actually is also dependent on how much of the capacity of both sides to understand the need to also take the fact that there's a need to have constitutionalism in Niger. There's a need for the former president to also have his freedom and his life is not jeopardized in the course of trying to push for constitutionalism. And at the end of the day, there's a need for us to also make sure that the whole sub-region, West Africa, there's no way that we would have war in West Africa or in Niger. And we will not have almost like a collapse of security in most of the Sahel, the area that borders Nigeria, Niger, and the rest of that. And I'm not sure this is what any of the West African countries, including Nigeria, is ready for. And we don't actually want to put the life of so many people in jeopardy. I mean, this is not just only about business and the economic aspect. I have seen people complaining about losing almost like 13 billion
Mr. Suraj, absolutely. And since the coup, if you can hear me, since the coup, there have been multiple protests within Niger, outside of Niger, in some northern states in Nigeria, where people are against military intervention, because already we know ECOWAS had activated its standby force in that country. So what do you think now is the way forward? Because importantly, I believe that the main interest is that the people of Niger have, peace. There is no further degeneration of conflict. So what is the way forward now?
The way forward now is for some neutral habitats to also continue mediating the process between particularly ECOWAS in this instance and also Niger Republic. There's the need for some of the, unfortunately, quite a number of the leaders in Africa are also guilty of unconstitutional administration of their government. I was listening to the president of Côte d'Ivoire yesterday, And I was really worried that, I mean, this was someone who also manipulated his constitution to have a second term that was not there when he was contesting originally. Some of these guys are also creating situations that would almost lead to what you have in Niger. So some of the West African and African leaders need to also, under democratic dispensation, keep themselves within constitutional provisions and not manipulate the constitutional process that will lead to some of these situations that we're facing with now. But in the case of Niger, we need to have independent arbiters who must continue to mediate the process, just like
Absolutely.
the ulamas have successfully done during their last visit to Niger. ECOWAS should build on this, and there should be no reason to actually keep the option of military intervention actually
Absolutely.
on the table.
You have made your points, Mr. Siraj. You have made a point. I must sincerely appreciate you. Lanre Siraj is African Affairs Analyst and Security Expert. Thank you for talking to us on The World Now.
Always my pleasure.